Yeah. So we talked about this offline, and I think it's a great topic to discuss online to lead off this episode. Just how impressed you were with the way David Roche rolled out his content before the Western States 100. You called it a masterclass. Go into detail about just what impressed you about that whole production.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is this idea of personal brand on YouTube. And I think that's where most corporate brands fail is people don't want to follow brands. They want to follow personal, but they want to follow people. And I think that the power of YouTube really lies as a platform in the ability to tell a story, not just in individual videos. I mean, each video can be a story, right? It can, you can make a film, you can tell a story, but the channel can tell a story over time. There can be this narrative arc that connects each video. It's funny, I've actually had some comments on some of my films where to me, they feel almost just like random stories. This race, and people will say, great episode. And so they see it as an episodic. They see it as episodes in my life and my girlfriend Audrey's life or career, I guess, running career. They see it as episodes and as part of a greater story, right? So I think that that's the first sort of principle, I think, of success on YouTube is this idea that you can tell a long-term story that's connected by these dots. And part of that is telling a personal story. So when a brand tries to do this, it's often these disparate stories about random athletes. At least it feels random sometimes to the audience. One day you're getting, if you take Solomon as an example, who I harp on a lot, they combined their ski and running channels years ago. So you'll get a running film, and then next week you get a ski film. And the ski fans don't know who the running athlete is and vice versa. So it can feel quite random. You end up getting a bunch of subscribers kind of waiting around for content that feels relevant to them, as opposed to wanting and anticipating each piece of content that comes out. And that's where, when you're telling individual stories, we can follow an athlete like David Roche over time and see his story evolve. And I think that the reason why I think David is kind of leading the charge here as far as kind of, I don't know, best practices or whatever it might be, he's having so much success on YouTube is because he's got a few ingredients going. And one is it's still brand supported. And I think that's the main thing. So the key to all this is it's not that brands shouldn't be on YouTube. It's that they should be investing in their athletes on YouTube, either creating and elevating channels for them or just sponsoring them and giving them the resources and letting them run with it. And that's exactly what the feed has been doing. So the feed isn't trying to make films about David. They're saying, here's some money, go nuts. And then David partners with director Cody, right? So a talented filmmaker, so that David's not having to sit in the edit suite for 40 hours a week. Cody's doing it. David just has to do the running and some of the storytelling. He's a good storyteller himself. But you've got the brand funding with the professional production coming from director Cody wrapped up in a personal brand that is David Roche's channel. And I think that's why it's having so much success.
One of the questions I had about this series, again, just thinking about how and whether you replicate it across other athletes, sports, etc., how high do the stakes need to be? And to go back before that question, obviously with David's series, part of what was attractive about it was he set the bar so high and there were sort of dire consequences. He was either going to win Western States and break the course record, or there was sort of going to be this tremendous failure. There were high stakes there. And I have to imagine that played a big role in the success, in addition to all those pieces you described. So with your experience, is that a necessity? Does there need to be this real, sort of dire consequence built into the episodes?
I mean, I think yes, but the stakes, you do need to identify the stakes. Like we're talking about essential kind of storytelling elements, right? So a lot of the films we see in David's content, it's the hero's journey. It's a pretty typical archetype of storytelling. It's Lord of the Rings, right? It's a character is setting out to overcome a challenge. And this is built into trail running. I mean, this is when you run an ultra marathon, it's the hero's journey. It's right there in front of you. You don't have to think much past that. And the stakes are sometimes just, can I finish? The stakes can be, can I finish my first 100-miler? I mean, David debuted with an amazing 100-mile performance. The stakes might be, I DNF'd my last 100-miler. Can I come back from that failure? Which again, we saw with David here. So, but I think the stakes can also be as simple as, I'm an athlete from sea level and I'm going to go run Hard Rock next year, hopefully. And the stakes will be, can I put in the training at sea level enough to overcome this, this hurdle, so I can succeed to the level I want to succeed at. That'll be sort of the hurdle that I'm jumping over. It's not just any race; it's a high altitude race. And so I think it's important when we're telling stories to identify what are the unique challenges. You don't need to create them; you just need to identify them and sort of lean into those. I watched a film recently, and I can't remember the athlete's name, so I apologize to him. But he's got a massive channel. It's a lot of triathlon content, I believe, and he did the Norseman race, which is like a crazy triathlon. They jump off a boat into like frigid waters, and it's like an uphill bike ride and then an uphill run. Like, it's a really crazy, I believe it was in Norway. And the storytelling was so compelling, not because, as if the race wasn't hard enough, but he gave himself 2 weeks to train for it. So he raised the stakes. And I sort of watched it, and then I dissected it, because I thought, why did I find this so compelling? And I was like, okay, it's a compelling character. He's got a through line on his channel. So he does these things repeatedly. So you kind of you follow him to see what's the next crazy challenge he's going to take on. But he didn't just choose to do a crazy race. He chose to do it with the most restrictive amount of time for training possible. And he even went as far as interviewing a doctor who was like, this is crazy. Here you're going to face hypothermia. You're going to face this. He talked to a coach, this is nuts, but maybe we can do it. And here he is trying to learn to swim, he got bike fitted. He's trying to do all these things within a 2-week period. So he elevated the stakes. Now, I don't think you need to do that and go quite that far. But that's the kind of example of, I think, just identifying, a lot of us do naturally have these constraints. Maybe you're a busy parent, and that's the story. How can you train for this thing with the constraints you have in your life? So I think often we have these constraints and we have these stakes. We just need to identify them when we're telling stories.
Failure is just as interesting too. I think the David Roche blog series showed that the result objectively could end in failure, right? Like, he could not finish the race, not win, not set a course record, but there's still great closure there. And you can tell the story of, in the wake of that, what I learned, where we're going next. So that's cool, because I feel like a lot of productions in our space, if they don't end neatly, sometimes they get scrapped.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is the difference. I feel like maybe we've talked about this in the past. The difference, I think, between the opportunity for storytelling on a platform like YouTube for athletes versus the traditional kind of ways we tell story around athletics for professional sponsored athletes, where it's all about the winning. It's about trying to get on the podium. And if you don't, you kind of just don't tell that story. Maybe you do a little Instagram post, but they don't have to make films about the 11th place finisher at Western States, right? Whereas on YouTube, you can, it's not just YouTube. It's kind of any storytelling where it's divorced from the results. It's more about the story. It can be a compelling story, a DNF, a failure. The third act can be the lessons we learned from that failure, or maybe why it wasn't quite a failure. I ran Badwater this year, and I set for myself a very aggressive A goal and a somewhat more realistic B goal, and then a C goal, which was basically just to finish. And I missed both my A and my B goal, which was new for me. I don't usually do that. I usually set fairly realistic goals, and I'm usually pretty consistent, which frankly, probably gets boring after a while, that I'm not setting more aggressive goals and sometimes swinging for the fences. So this film is going to be all about the fact that I essentially failed, but coming to terms with why that wasn't a failure at all. I succeeded in trying something new for me, which was, let's set a big, hairy, audacious goal, and hey, maybe we'll just completely miss it and we'll learn something in the process. So I think that's where we have this depth of storytelling available to us on a platform like YouTube, really just in film, longer form content in general, whether it's on YouTube or not. And I think that's where, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, like this idea of athletic sponsorships versus budgets for content to tell stories. Those are different things, because we can tell stories of failure. Those are relatable. Those are accessible in ways that just sponsoring the top tier athletes never really are. In fact, we had a conversation with some friends and I last night over sushi about Kilian Jornet's most recent project, which is absolutely incredible, but almost too incredible. It's like, how do you relate to it? And this idea came up that Kilian's almost too good, because there's almost never any stakes, because you just assume he's going to succeed. he almost never fails. And so it's almost like he's too good, and he's not good enough at identifying the stakes and leaning into the fact that, like he never admits a weakness if it exists almost. And I feel like that's what makes it so unrelatable. And maybe in that way, I mean, Killian's the most incredible athlete. He's been one of my biggest inspirations over the years, but maybe he's got something to learn about storytelling, because there's probably things that happen that he doesn't focus on enough that would make the story so much more relatable.
Yeah, it's now 2 consecutive years where he's done a major project that either doesn't have precedent or very minimal precedent. So it's hard for the public to grasp, hard to compare. We just had Andrew Drummond on the podcast, who runs a retail store out in upstate New Hampshire, and he follows this stuff closely. And back when Killian was outsourcing some ideas for what he would do later this year, I think Andrew had messaged him and said, lean into the classic routes. Like FKT has the board of the top 10 sort of prized, most popular, sought after routes across the US. And, that's an interesting one, because obviously each one of those is steeped in precedent. There's a major history track record. Let's see how maybe you just go barnstorm across the US, and it would be exhausting, but see how you stack up on each one, just kind of on a whim.
Sure. I mean, when Killian broke the Bob Graham round record years ago, I mean, that's relatable. We kind of know what the established times were. We kind of have a sense of what the challenges are, because we've seen other people tell that story. But yeah, some of the things he does, they're so beyond the realm of the average athlete to not to do it in that time, but even to attempt the scope of that it's really hard to relate to.
How important or how valuable is it for the character in a David Roche-esque series to be relatively polarizing? For example, they either have a personality or they have views that a lot of people are going to agree with, a lot of people are going to disagree with. The comment section is going to be this massive debate over something that was said or tested or tried. How important is that to you?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm very polarizing. I'd say I'm pretty, maybe to a fault, I'm careful to keep my content very family friendly. I'm trying to think of other athletes who are. I think it certainly helps with engagement on some platforms, although I'm not sure that YouTube quite works that way, because YouTube is a little bit more, it looks more for signals on viewer retention and how much you're sharing it. I almost think it leans more, I mean, the comments can be pretty toxic, but I almost think that the algorithm, the way it responds to signals, leans more towards positive signals, like positive reinforcement. How good is the storytelling? How engaging is it? So I'm not sure that really plays much on YouTube, although definitely I could see more on David's wider brand, like on Instagram and elsewhere. Yeah. He can be fairly polarizing. I know you either love him or you maybe don't love him as much. I would say, though, I want to add as well, I think the other, thing that, and Finn, you and I have talked about this in the past as well, that the other genius, and it could be genius, it could be something that happened organically, but either way, in hindsight, it's genius, of what David and Megan are doing is their business model. It very much is a funnel. And if you think about the top of the funnel being a very wide net of creating fairly wide appealing content. So these films that are getting hundreds of thousands of views on a platform like YouTube, right? So acting essentially as top of funnel for the sport as well, I would argue. Getting viewers in who maybe aren't endemic to trail running, who aren't quite as steeped in it, who maybe wouldn't care as much about a Killian Jornet effort, can relate more to a Leadville 100, for example. And then it's feeding down to the Swap podcast, right? Which is more about then the community engagement. And then that feeds down to their Patreon, which I know is very successful. So they have paid content. And of course, at the bottom of the funnel is their coaching, which is probably their main source of revenue. So it's really this beautiful funnel, which in hindsight looks completely purpose-built. Again, maybe it's not. I'd love to talk to David about that one day and see to what degree they plan that. But the beauty of it is that, again, you have brand sponsors funding the top of the funnel. You have the feed paying for that content. So it's very low risk. It's not like they're spending hundreds of thousands out of pocket on content creation like many of us would have to.
Great point. And yeah, I would add, I'm a huge fan of the format, and I consumed every single one of those episodes. It certainly made race day, Western States, even more exciting to tune into. And you just reminded me, looking at all of these people who have done so much legwork, like David and Megan have with content and lead up, other people that come to mind, yourself, Max Jolliffe, Courtney DeWalter and her team, like there are these people that independent of the race being called, people are tuning into the live stream to follow their progress, to see how they're doing. And you see it in the comment sections all the time, the demands that camera and updates be placed on these athletes. And I think we're going to get to this really interesting point where for the people that do that work, that have that interest and lead up to tell a story, there's either going to be this interesting reckoning on the live streams or a splintering where almost like two different productions have to happen or to satisfy two different types of audiences, like people that are maybe watching just the pure outcome of the race versus stories that they want to see unfold live that have been told on YouTube in the lead up.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you have athletes like myself who I would argue I'm more of a filmmaker first, athlete second. I have okay results, but I'm by no means a professional athlete or elite athlete. And then you have the elite athletes on the other end of the spectrum. And then you have those in the middle. I think Max Jolliffe is a great example. I mean, he's an amazing athlete. He's also one of the bigger influencers right now. So would you say, is he influencer first, professional athlete second, or the other way around? He's building up his portfolio of sponsors, including a couple non-endemic sponsors I've heard about. He's got a great production team around him who are creating content for him, similar to that David Roche formula. I don't think he has that funnel built out just yet. So he still is really relying on his legs to pay the bills. But yeah, I think you have sort of that sweet spot athlete like Max who can kind of play it both ways. And even if he has a bad result at a race, he can tell a good story about it. He's got a film crew there ready to capture that quote unquote failure, right? As he hopefully rises from the ashes and stumbles in at the end of a 200-mile race. I mean, that can make for some compelling storytelling.
This episode of the Singletrack Podcast is brought to you by Precision Fuel and Hydration. One of the biggest nutritional shifts for me has been dialing in hourly carb, sodium, and fluid rates based on sweat rate, race conditions, goals. And what I really appreciate about Precision's role in this is that they don't push a one-size-fits-all product. Instead, they start with their fuel and hydration planner, which takes a few minutes to complete and gives you a clear, personalized plan for your next race or long effort. If you've ever wondered, am I underfueling, overhydrating? Why does this fall apart late? That planner is the best place to start. If you want to check it out, go to precisionhydration.com/planner, or just use the link in our show notes, and you can use the code Singletrack for 15% off your first order as well. Thanks to Precision for supporting the show and for bringing some much needed clarity to ultra running nutrition. So you showed this really interesting contrast earlier. On one hand, you have Salomon, and their strategy appears to be just sort of put all this content in one place. You've got, for example, snowboarding videos and running videos coexisting on the same channel. On the other hand,
I would say it's a lack of strategy. Lack of strategy. Yeah.
On the other hand, and this is one of many, I'm sure, but the feed perhaps understands that YouTube is a personality-driven platform, and they just give David and Megan the money to go and create and put it all on their own channels and just trust that there's going to be some sort of interesting kickback or funnel back to the feed. This seems to be working from what I can tell. I mean, if you're just judging it based on attention, awareness, cultural resonance, it seems like it's been a success. To what extent do you believe this is a watershed moment for branded content on YouTube? And we see a lot more other shoe brands, apparel brands, etc., follow a similar strategy with other athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we see more of it. The feed continues to be a good example. I believe it's Matt Johnson, is his name. Yeah, Matt Johnson is out there doing the Texas 1000, running across the state for the second time. And I know this because Drew Darby is along with him for the second time, documenting it. And both you and I have worked with Drew. So another great example, the feed is sponsoring it. He's got the feed hats. He's got branding throughout his on his bus and things, paying for Drew to create the content so that he can just focus on the run. And of course, they're putting out social media, Instagram updates and stuff along the way as well. So the feed is clearly doing this at scale at this point with different athletes. Why brands like Salomon, who for years, I think were leading the charge on amazing storytelling and content creation, why they haven't been able to pivot, I don't know. But I think maybe it's because they are incumbents. They're the big corporate entities now, and they're having a hard time, I think, turning the ship. I mean, for years, Salomon working with Dean Leslie and his team at the African Attachment primarily, were creating just amazing films. You'd go to a film festival, a trail running film festival, and chances are at least one or two films were by Solomon. And people for years would reference Solomon as the gold standard in storytelling. And they would tell stories about individual athletes. But when it came to the distribution side of things, they never quite leaned into those individual athletes, into, why doesn't Courtney Dauwalter have her own channel? Why it would be the biggest channel, I think, in the sport if she did. Now, maybe she doesn't need it, arguably, or want it. I mean, I know she's a fairly private person when it comes to her training, so that could be a big part of it. So it could be a bad example, but if you go down a couple of steps, Matthew Blanchard has his own YouTube channel, but doesn't look like Solomon really leans into that. They still publish content about him on their own channel. And yes, they have whatever it is, 300,000 subscribers, but the engagement is fairly low relative to that. The view to subscriber ratio on some of these channels is quite low. You also have to look at sometimes these channels, they boost their content with paid views. So sometimes that's a little bit of a, you can assume that the channel's doing better than it is. But if you look at a channel like Patagonia, for example, we were talking about this recently offline, they actually published all kinds of sports. Somebody pointed out, they uploaded like 20 videos in the same day about how to tie different kinds of like fly fishing lures on it. Like these really, if you're into fly fishing, I'm sure you'd be into that. But this is the same channel they publish running content on, skiing content on. I mean, at least make a separate fly fishing channel. They're free to create. These channels are free. You don't need to be hosting all this content in the same place. So what you end up seeing is a channel like Patagonia with 600,000 subscribers getting 600 views on a video in the first 24 hours. And that to me is just, by any measurement, a failed YouTube strategy. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Oh, no, it does. And as a follow-up, I'm thinking of another athlete on the Solomon roster who might be more receptive, Lucy Bartholomew. I think, for example, if Solomon gave her the resources to either start or really bulk up that channel, I think it would be a hit. And let's just imagine, for example, this is a hypothetical, but let's just imagine that someone from the Solomon creative team is listening to our conversation right now, and you get to speak directly to them. How would you pitch them on the value of making all that investment on a channel that doesn't say Solomon on it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest question. Before I answer that, I want to point out a couple other great examples. Sally McRae, of course, has been leading the charge on personal brand for years. But you have athletes like Heather Jackson, Tara Dower. These are athletes who are creating content on YouTube. I think Tara might be creating a lot of that herself, whereas going back to Heather, Drew, I think, has worked with her, Drew Darby, and created content.
And Sally,
again,
too.
Brand funded, right?
Yep.
Sorry.
And Sally, too. I think he's done that with a lot of vlog.
That's exactly right. So some of Sally's arguably best content was created by Drew, brand funded by Camelback and a few other brands. So a few other athletes have been doing an amazing job at this. Yeah, I've been running an agency for years, and I know one of the things I came across in sort of my management training was, there's this question of like investing in staff training, and the question is like, there's this anecdote about the CFO saying, well, what if we invest in training all of our staff and they leave? And then the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay? Right. So that's kind of the thing here. Solomon, I'm sure a brand like Solomon would be worried about an athlete leaving. Look at Kilian Jornet. So Kilian Jornet has a YouTube channel with, I think, about 110,000 subscribers last I checked. So fewer than me. Merit-based. If you look at purely merit, obviously Kilian should have more subscribers than me, but he hasn't been publishing regularly over the years. He started this channel, I think it was like 12 years ago. Every couple of years he uploads. So he really hasn't nurtured that channel. And really it's that Solomon really hasn't nurtured that channel. Because imagine if all that content from years ago, Kilian's Quest, which is amazing, all those films from years ago were put on Kilian's channel. It again would be one of the biggest channels in trail running. And Kilian did leave the brand, did leave Solomon. But for all of those years he was there, imagine how much traction that channel would have gotten. And I think this is maybe more, it's not so much should Solomon have invested, it's more of should Kilian have demanded Solomon invested, maybe? I think an athlete with that much pull, could he have negotiated that in his contract that, hey, any content, let's put it on my channel because I want to think about my personal brand long-term.
It's interesting as a follow-up to that. It's interesting that brands would have that concern with individual athletes, but less so with perhaps relatively larger media platforms. For example, when I think of a brand partnering with Singletrack, in a lot of ways, they're helping us grow for the future, but they see the immediate value right away in partnering.
You're right. And they don't, and same with like Instagram and stuff, right? They do invest in athlete content. Yeah. In fact, going back to
scratch, maybe because we're starting from scratch with these athletes, it's a different scenario.
And to be clear, these are large investments on YouTube. I mean, we're talking about, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars per film. So maybe that's another thing as well. There's a little bit, it's a little bit harder to make that case around the boardroom that video doesn't go on the channel, on the brand channel. I didn't answer your question directly, though. If I was to go in tomorrow and pitch as a consultant, Solomon, on a strategy, here's one that might satisfy kind of both arguments. Instead of making separate athlete channels, let's make a Solomon team channel for the running team. How many international athletes are there? Let's say pick the top dozen, right? That they've got on the roster. And every season at the beginning, they make a video announcing who the athletes are. It goes on that channel. And throughout the season, they make videos with those athletes. So you might say, well, that's not a personal brand, but it's an ensemble cast. And that's the other formula I think that works really well on YouTube. We see a lot of ensemble casts. Yes Theory is a channel I follow. It's a travel vlog series. Dude Perfect. There's lots of these great examples of ensemble casts on YouTube. But the point is, those casts don't change that much, or at least don't change very often. So you're still following personalities. It's a group of personalities. Yeah. Maybe we could do the same thing with teams. So get your dozen athletes. Let's follow them throughout the season. And strategy, again, going back to my consulting days, the best definition of strategy I've heard is what you say no to in a world of opportunity. So what we're saying is that we're still telling different stories about different athletes, but at least we're not posting fly fishing videos. At least we're not posting how to, a product demonstration with the new S-Lab Advanced Skin 12. I mean, this stuff people don't care about. In this case, they want to follow the athletes in their journey. So that could be a great example of carving out a separate channel just about the running athletes. And once a year, yes, that roster might change a little bit. The ensemble cast, somebody leaves, somebody new comes in. But the point is we'd focus on that cast and we'd get to know, like, and trust that audience. So if they did want to do product videos, well, let's have Mathieu Blanchard be the guy to explain the product.
This is a fantastic idea. And I could be wrong here, but I know you've been somewhat on the inside of this. Is in any way, shape, or form, is Kraft trying to do this, or is Terex? Like, do they have kind of team-ish dedicated channels?
Kraft is probably the one I don't think I'll be speaking kind of out of turn here. I visited, I hung out with the team in Tuscany earlier this year. The Kraft team, the PR agency they were working with, brought me over. So I got to know not only the athletes, but also the film crew that they traveled around from Sweden. A couple really nice guys, two brothers actually. And they're really investing, I think, over-indexing relative to the size of the team and the brand within the trail running space on storytelling content. So they're doing a really great job. But even the filmmakers, they're really having to push for, like, let's tell more personal stories. Let's try to really get in the weeds on this stuff. That's what people want, longer form. Kraft is slowly edging towards that. But even Kraft they're a legacy brand. They have a long history in Nordic. They're not a new startup by any means. They're just a relatively new entry into trail running. So even that ship is proving difficult to steer, but they're doing a great job. They're definitely one to watch, and they've been telling some really great stories. But I do think they could take it a step further because all that content's being published on the brand channel. And some of their athletes, they're really compelling characters. And I really think they could carry their own weight on YouTube, a lot of them.
And then if you were talking to, again, someone at a company like Solomon about investing in like a Lucy Bartholomew or Courtney DeWalter channel, would the metrics be just like, I think it's a safer bet in terms of views, engagement, and brand affinity? Like, what would be part of your pitch there? For just like,
I think it's depth versus width, right? Like people can go much deeper with a relationship with an individual athlete, or again, an ensemble cast, than you can with the brand. And so again, I think we look at some of these brand channels and go, well, they must be doing something right. Again, they have Patagonia, 680,000 subscribers on YouTube. But you look at the engagement and it's just so shallow. It's so shallow. A lot of those subscribers, it's like they just have been casting this massive net and they've had their channel for 15 years, but these are unengaged viewers.
Okay. I think this is great. And, one of the follow-ups that I wanted to ask you about, because I do feel like this is a fairly new development in trail where the brands are recognizing that it's a personality-driven platform. Are there any other examples of evolution that you've seen in this space in the last 5 to 10 years that's exciting you?
Well, I mean, I think really it's the last couple of years. And again, you and I have talked about this offline. I'm working on a bit of a video essay on the history of trail running cinema, I guess you could call it. And it's going to start with, some of the OG films, at least some of the first films I saw, of course, Unbreakable by J.B. Benna, but also some of the films like Running on the Sun or Running the Sahara, rather, with my buddy Ray Zahab. And, some of these, like, they were massive productions back in the day, 15 years ago, through some of the early shootubers, like Ethan Newberry, Ginger Runner, and of course, Billy Yang and his work, which has been so influential. The second generation of kind of shootubers or YouTube vloggers, which I think I would include myself in, and then of course we have, Kofuzi and people like this on the road running side. But throughout that, then we saw the rise of kind of another, I think, generation of filmmakers like Dylan Harris. Of course, a lot of them were influenced by, again, Dean Leslie of The African Attachment for his early work for Solomon. And so I have a podcast called Creators Cool Down where I've been interviewing a lot of filmmakers, and I have interviews lined up with guys like Dean to capture some of those early conversations, the early moments, some of that early history. I hope to get JB on as well. And I see it as almost like a bit of a research project for this larger video essay where I'm going to try to use sound bites and anecdotes from some of those interviews as almost like an oral history of, again, cinema and trail running over the last, call it 15 years. And I try to be a student of the platform of YouTube, but also of this type of content. I really enjoy watching documentaries, specifically trail running documentaries. But the last couple of years, I have a hard time keeping up with the amount of content coming out. And that's not a bad thing.
Okay.
It's great to see for the sport, but it's gotten to a point, there was a tipping point. So in this sort of video essay that I have, I see it probably starting with Unbreakable and ending with The Chase. Dylan Harris film about the 2024 Cocodona 250, right? 2024. Because that I felt was like, it was a nice bookend to Unbreakable. It was sort of like the new Unbreakable, but about 200s, which are like the new 100 mile. But also that was the tipping point where just so much content is coming out now. I can't keep up.
There's something that I appreciate about the classics, and I do think there's a through line through a lot of them, including this most recent one, The Chase, where within the first 1 to 2 minutes of the film, you know exactly what the stakes are. The referential piece that I always go to is Billy Yang's piece about CCC and UTMB in 2015, because in those first 30 seconds, he tells you straight up, American men have never won this race, and the Nike team is seen as soft. And this film is going to demonstrate why both of those things are untrue. We're going to shock the world and we're going to redefine the brand for this team. I thought that was so cool. And I do think one of the reasons why other films don't necessarily rise to the top is they sort of like intentionally muddy the waters and make it abstract and like obscure what it's about. Like maybe it's not artistically cool to just say right up front what you're about to see. And I wish more stuff leaned into just like straight up telling you what you're about to expect, setting the table, expectations, stuff like that.
I think also when we're talking about YouTube as a platform as well, yes, we can do art on YouTube, but there's also, there's constraints. There's a lot of competing content, competing for attention. And that's where, I personally fall back on a lot of the tropes that were established from television because they work. And when you watch a TV show, they tell you in the first 30 to 60 seconds what you're about to see. They just tell you. Yeah. They show you highlights. but they open some loops. They open some questions. They don't say, you're going to see this. They say, could you see this? Will this person succeed? What will they, think about a home reno show. I mean, it leaves you curious what the final product's going to look like. I mean, these formats work and exist for a reason. So I adopted that early on with essentially the trailer. And I end up using the first minute of my films as a trailer. Yeah. It works. And then trying to open loops as well. I mean, I edit my films, for example, around commercial breaks. Again, 7 to 10 minutes ish of content, then go to a commercial break. I'll fade to black, and I try to open a loop because that's exactly what we were trained to do with television production. Yeah. I say that that's what I was trained as a professional to do, was 7 minutes of content, commercial break, 2 minutes, come back. And you can actually use those strategically to show passage of time. I try to use them, for example, in a 200-mile race to go from day to night, or night to day. And I'll say, here I am heading off into the nights, and I'm going to have to do this, this, and this. And then you come back from commercial and maybe it's morning. And so I'll kind of use that to help give the viewer a break. But it's editing around commercial breaks has been done for decades. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing it on YouTube. YouTube's basically just television. It's pre-roll, post-roll, and mid-roll ads, exactly like a television show. And I think it's actually no coincidence that, my content's quite long. I tend to do 60 to 80-minute films, but it looks like 25 minutes-ish tends to be a real sweet spot on YouTube. And that, again, I think that's similar to television, where you have 30 minutes, 22 minutes of content with 8 minutes of commercials.
This is me editorializing as a consumer of the platform. I have always told people that are creating content, you seem to get this to a T, that I have a long attention span. I really do think that I have a fairly long attention span, but I have a short consideration span. I will let you know within the first 30 or 60 seconds whether I'm going to keep watching this thing till the end. And then I'm locked in. But it really, I need that table setting in the first minute or so. So I think
it's just like with writing, where the opening paragraph buys you the readership for the next paragraph, and the opening sentence buys you for that paragraph, and the last sentence gets you to read it's the same thing with video. The thumbnail, ideally, in the title should create a sense of curiosity. And you go, I can't help but click on this. I got to see what the answer to this question is being asked. Can the person finish the race? What does this person think of this shoe? Whatever the question is being asked. And then the opening 30 seconds, basically, like you said, it buys you. I mean, you could argue the first 3 to 10 seconds buys you the next 30. Yeah. And that buys you the next maybe 3 minutes. And that buys you the next maybe 10 minutes. But you do have to keep reestablishing curiosity. So there's this idea of opening new loops in storytelling. So I think you end up with, if you look at, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings, like, yes, there's this bigger mission, but within that, they hit some smaller challenges. Like, we have to cross this cliff. We have to battle this. I'm not actually a major Lord of the Rings fan, so I'm not sure what some of the subplots would be, but you have subplots that keep you hooked. And then in the meantime, there's still this bigger question of, will they get to the end of their journey? But you have these sub journeys as well. And I think that we can look for those opportunities, even in a race. It's man, like, my stomach isn't feeling good all of a sudden. And the next few minutes are about dealing with those stomach issues. And then once you get past that, okay, we're back on track. There's still the bigger question of, will I hit my goal for this event? Oh, now I've got a blister developing. Okay, we got to deal with this now. How's that going to affect the outcome?
So if the chase is bookending this sort of original era of YouTube, of running YouTube, is the start of this next era all about more productions kind of doing what you're doing, where they're formulating things based on sort of some TV concepts that have been decades old? Or what else is involved in the next era?
Sure. I think we're bringing television to YouTube, and that's not a bad thing. It funds it's ad funded. I mean, at the end of the day, it is. It can also be sponsor funded. Doesn't have to be ad supported. And that, I think, makes for better storytelling. You don't have to have interruptions. But either way, again, even that, sponsors and endorsement and product placement, that's been done on television for years as well. That's nothing new. And so it's applying the old model to a new platform where there are no gatekeepers. And that's the important thing. I can make a TV show from my home office here and publish it tomorrow without anybody having any say. And I can find my audience. And more importantly, I can get direct feedback from that audience and see what's working. I can look at retention. I can get anecdotal feedback from the comments. Audience members can literally help direct the direction of my content in the future. And that's something that we haven't had on television. So I think we're going to see better content as a result. We're seeing a better audience connection. There's no reason that if Anthony Bourdain were around, if he were around and producing the kind of content he did, there's no reason he couldn't have done the same thing, but for YouTube. We're seeing creators like Michelle Carr is one who I really admire on YouTube, who basically is making a TV show called Challenge Accepted. And every episode is her. This episode, she's trying to become a professional boxer. This episode, she's getting through boot camp in the military. This one, she's trying to become an air traffic controller in 2 weeks or less. Right? There's constraints. There's a goal. There's stakes. Each episode is about 25 minutes. It's ad supported plus with some sponsorship. It's television on YouTube. Super compelling, and she's getting more engagement and more views than most television shows do. And it's a very small team. And I think we're going to see that kind of thing increasingly being applied to our sport. I'm hoping to lead the charge in that way as well and elevate, production values, start telling other athlete stories, probably still weaving my own story into that. That's what'll tie it into my channel. And yeah, I think we're just going to see so much great content coming out that it's going to be hard to keep up with it, which is a great thing.
I think your point about YouTube getting more busy is interesting. And it's exciting to me, by the way. But if I had to speculate, again, just as a observer, fan, consumer, I would still guess that Instagram is sort of like the platform of most commonality across the sport.
Yeah.
Like that's where things seem to converge across regions, cultures. The most number of athletes are there creating stuff. It's sort of like the watering hole. Do you foresee a world where at some point things change and like YouTube becomes the default platform for how to get information, how to create content and stuff in our sport? Or are there constraints that we should be aware of?
I think that Instagram and YouTube, short form and long form, are just very different types of content, I think. And both can exist and both have a reason to exist. I just ran the Mammoth 200 last week, and I had Floris from Path Projects, who I work with on the occasional project, really great local American brand of apparel. And one of my favorite things is that Floris, he's often at the events. He's volunteering. Path was sponsoring an aid station there. And not only was he supporting my film, but he was out helping me create some short form content. So he was creating reels for me on Instagram. And it's something I wouldn't normally do. I don't normally gravitate towards Instagram, or short form for that matter, I should say. And I don't normally invest in it. So here I had Drew Darby and Derek Lytle out with me shooting long form, cinematic, 16:9. We got some incredible footage. But the content that so far everyone's engaged with, of course, were those reels. And they were getting tens of thousands of views, and people were saying, I loved following along with that content. And that was because Floris was creating it for me as a value add and collaborating, sharing it with me as a collaborator. So I owe a lot to him for that. He did the same thing at Badwater, actually. He sponsored my film, but he also came out and crewed for me and was creating content along the way. So I do think you need both. And I think I need to start investing more in short form content, mostly for the immediacy that it provides. But I don't think that they are in competition with each other. YouTube clearly is in competition with traditional television. So as much as I'm saying, I think all we're doing is bringing that model over, it's that television and our viewing habits have migrated over to YouTube. It's just the new television. It's on demand, it's creator led, and we've skipped the middleman. We've skipped the executives having to green light the content before it gets made. And so, for example, my channel, I see close to now 60% watch time from a connected television, which means most people are watching my content on presumably a big screen TV, sitting on a couch. That's a lean back experience. We queue it up, we set the remote down, we've got our popcorn or whatever, and we watch. We're not hovering over it with the mouse, ready to click on the next thing like we are when we're on mobile, on desktop, or on Instagram. And I think that's why they're not competing platforms. They're different. I often go on Instagram when I want to waste time. I mean, I guess I watch television when I want to waste time as well, but it's a little more intentional. Like I'll sit down and be like, okay, I got an hour or two. What show am I going to watch? So we're seeing YouTube competing and taking over for television, but we're also seeing it compete with Netflix now as well. Because it's essentially, we're getting the same value from YouTube as we are from Netflix. It's our entertainment. It's something we do with our spouse, our significant other, or even as a group of friends, we'll sit and watch content, long form content. You can't really do that with short form content. I just think they're completely different formats for different purposes. I think they both have a place. And again, I need to lean more into short form to supplement my long form content.
And for whatever reason, do YouTube Shorts have a different, maybe even lesser level of impact than an Instagram Reel?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of YouTube Shorts for a number of reasons. I could talk at length on this, so you might need to cut me off. But
No.
and I think you'll find when you listen to a lot of like YouTube strategists, like different YouTube podcasts, most people are kind of down on YouTube Shorts. Most people who have done YouTube long form for a long time. And there's a few reasons. I think for one, it's they've been out for long enough that we've seen that the performance doesn't translate, because the kinds of people in the context in which those people engage with short form content, whether it's on Instagram or on YouTube, it's usually different than the kinds of people and the ways we engage with long form. Like I said, most of my viewers are now actually like 60% plus are watching long form as a sit back, a lean back experience on their television, which you're not doing with the vertical shelf on the YouTube app. They're watching it to waste time. This is the same way you might with Reels. So I think YouTube Shorts is competing with Reels in the same way. The problem is, I think some people might subscribe to your short form because they like that cadence. They like that the quick hits. They like the humor maybe that comes with a lot of short form content. And I think that there's obviously some people who might convert, who might then later watch your long form, but I just find it hard to believe that somebody's going to discover a 45-second video from me and then have the patience to sit down and watch an 80-minute film on their couch later on.
So the short, we were talking about trailers earlier, like kind of putting a trailer into the beginning of a video. A short, for whatever reason, wouldn't have that same trailer type effect where people watch the short and they're like, oh, I want to watch the rest of that video. I'll go click into the full thing.
On YouTube specifically, you mean?
Yeah.
No, that strategy has actually been kind of, I guess, debunked for lack of a better expression. That most people would recommend the video itself, any short form content on YouTube needs to provide value in itself. It can't just be a teaser for long form. And in fact, I've tested it. I launched a video just a couple of weeks ago that was a teaser for long form. It was my worst performing short since I've been experimenting with shorts. Yeah. So no, you have to provide separate value. And again, if you're the kind of person who can provide value in short form, Andy Glaze is a great example. He's got a massive following in short form. It hasn't translated to long form. It's not to say he can't do both, but the audience might be different. And he's going to have to be doing both at the same time to the same level. And that's a lot of work.
So just thinking about the consequences, both positive and negative, of this like newfound busyness on the platform, what comes of it? Yeah. What do you see there?
I guess there's a few, I don't know, but I guess there's a few things to ask. Like, so the platform is still growing in adaptation a little bit. There's more people can be spending more time on YouTube to engage with more content. But at some point we might hit a saturation point. The sport though is also still growing. So I think that there's room for more content, especially when a lot of the content that's being put out, mine included, I believe, is top of funnel for the sport, meaning it's actually helping to grow the sport. And it's sending traffic to other videos. So I don't think that athletes and producers of trail running content like myself are currently competing against each other. I think we're competing against the rest of YouTube. And currently, I believe that rising tides are raising all ships.
How about this? Because we've talked about YouTube as just another form of television. I'm trying to think of how many television shows, either presently or historically, I have just actively followed. Do you have a sense of, if someone subscribes to a channel, what their capacity is for following along? Like how many active subscriptions they could have in place? Because I'm thinking about just like the average consumer on YouTube, especially someone in running YouTube. How many channels could they sort of balance at once and follow along with? Like at what point are we competing with other channels in the running space? Is it like 10?
Yeah, I guess I see what you mean. Yeah. Like I think it's really going to depend. I mean, some people just don't have a lot of time to watch content, and that includes some filmmakers in the space who I know don't have time to watch a lot of other content, because we talk about it, we'll sort of joke like, sorry, I haven't had time to watch your film yet. I've been traveling. And I'm sure that's the case with a lot of just like average consumers. And then I'm sure there's some who are outliers who watch a ton of content, people who are chronically online or just love engaging with that kind of content. So I think it'd be hard to find an average. I will say though, just to be kind of a little argumentative with how you pose the question.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about subscriptions. And we've talked about this in the past too. Subscribers, it's really a vanity metric for a number of reasons. The main reason being that just because you subscribe to something doesn't mean you're going to see it in your feed. There is a subscriptions page on YouTube, but most people don't go there. The research shows that most people it's an algorithm that's feeding you content. And usually, I mean, we assume that's going to be the stuff we subscribe to, but imagine you subscribe to 200 channels. Your homepage can only fit 20 videos. So is it showing you the most recent videos, even if 20 of them are from Patagonia, all uploaded in the same day about fly fishing? No, it's going to say, I know Finn's not going to watch those videos, so I'm not even going to show them to him, because people like Finn haven't watched them either. Yeah. It's going to show you the new Billy Yang film, whether you've subscribed to it or not, because it knows that people like you are more likely to watch it. So what ends up happening is it's less about who we subscribe to, and it's more about what we actually consume. And it's funny because I've come across some channels where I'm rediscovering them. And then I go to subscribe and I'm like, I'm already subscribed to this, but I haven't engaged with it for so long. It just stopped showing up for me for a while. And the inverse can be true, where I see content so frequently, I assume I'm subscribed, and I'm surprised when I'm not, because the algorithm typically knows better what we're going to actually engage with than we do.
What do you think is most responsible for a channel reliably appearing in those, first 20 homepage videos for you to consume?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about engagement. And by engagement, I mean a combination of retention. So first of all, do we actually click on the thumbnail? Second of all, do we actually watch it? And do we watch a lot of it? And do we comment on it? Do we share it? Do we engage with it? And so maybe this goes back to, like you mentioned, some figures who maybe are a little more polarizing. I mean, that could help, but it doesn't have to be polarizing. It could be stuff where maybe it's a video about how you DNF'd a race, and all the comments are supportive comments. People saying, "Don't worry, there's always next time," and you get hundreds of comments. That video is likely going to, rise through the algorithm a little bit more, especially if it's a compelling video that's keeping people engaged. So it's this is why I love the platform so much. It's gamified in a lot of ways. It gives you a lot of metrics, and there's revenue metrics, of course, and views, but more importantly, it's good content tends to rise to the top. The cream does tend to rise to the top. And if you are making compelling content consistently, and the similar type of content for the same audience, you're showing up over and over and over again, success will come. The algorithm, the platform wants the same thing. It wants to provide the best content to the right person in the right moment. Again, whether they've subscribed or not. It's the right video at the right time. So it tends to know, it probably will learn that Finn, when he's watching on his phone, doesn't watch 40-minute videos, watches 4-minute videos. It'll serve that video in that time. Whereas it probably knows when you're sitting on your television, watching through Apple TV, in the lean back experience, that's when you tend to watch 40-minute videos. It wants the same thing as you. So if you're showing up consistently producing, and it doesn't have, when I say high quality, it means just high value, like the right content for the right person. It doesn't have to be high quality in a truly qualitative measure. You will succeed. There's no gatekeeper telling you, no, we're not greenlighting that type of content this year. Which, if I sound bitter, it's because I'm from that world of gatekeepers traditionally, where so much great content has not been produced because of executives making bad calls.
How about this? So we started off the conversation talking about how, from a structural standpoint, the David Roche content makes sense. It's sort of what the platform, what the audiences are asking for. But I should say, and audiences are subscribing to David within the span of that series because they want to see how this journey is hashed out, what happens at the end of it. They want to follow along. To what extent, if David wants to create more content on YouTube, to what extent is he bound to those expectations of going on yet another hero's journey of trying to win a race, stuff like that, versus having the bandwidth to experiment into, like, I don't know, maybe David wants to become a gear reviewer, or he wants to lean more into coaching type content on the platform?
Well, I think we can, another framework on YouTube, we will look at sort of, there's discovery-based content, And these, you could argue, would be David's sort of premier films about, some of his races. And then you can have audience more engaging content, which in my case, I do sort of a vlog series that I call Time on Feet. My expectations for those films are 40 to 60,000 views. It's more my core audience, and then it tapers off. And I can be much more sort of kind of looser with the storytelling, and I can be a little more, talking about personal things that I maybe wouldn't talk about in a longer form film where I'm trying to get 10 times the viewership. But it's more of a funnel. So I have my discovery stuff, and David would too, and you can have your audience engagement stuff, which maybe in his case is more like the Swap podcast. That's where he takes people offline, but he could probably do more of that stuff maybe on the platform as well. And then you can even go a step further, which is, you watched his Leadville film. Maybe here's a video about the gear he used at Leadville. So sort of like a pack out video you'd see from a hiking channel. And the expectations would be that he'd get a lot fewer viewers, instead of 400,000, maybe it's 4,000. But the people who want to see that will see it. The people who tend to watch that kind of content, the algorithm will show it to them. So I think it's just kind of knowing which bucket you're creating for at the moment. Structuring the content appropriately.
So you can't have buckets. You would say that your channel can be kind of diverse.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I do. I think you need to kind of understand kind of what's the main thing, or what's the, in his case, kind of what is the funnel. I think, you and I have talked about this with the Singletrack channel, right? Yeah. So is The Finisher, such an incredible film. Is that a loss leader? Is that a discovery piece for the podcasts? And if it is, how likely are the viewers from that, or from the recent Bigfoot video about David Goggins, how likely are they to take the next step and watch the more engagement pieces, which are some of the more in-depth interviews? And then, what is the funnel, or are the interviews the main thing? Is that the discovery content? Are they linked, or are they kind of different audiences? So I think those are all kind of tough questions to ask, because I don't think you want to splinter your audience, but I think it's okay to sort of think of it more as a funnel, maybe a Venn diagram. I don't know. I guess there's different ways to look at it. But at the end of the day, I think you do need to identify, like, what's your main thing? What's your main value? And so for me, I do some gear videos, but I don't do a lot, because I don't ever want to be called a shoe reviewer. For me, it's like, I make these films. I'm trying to inspire people. I'm trying to get as many people on the top of the funnel as I can for both the sport and my channel. And then there's so many people that ask me about gear. I'm like, fine, I'll talk about gear, but it's a secondary thing. It's never going to be the main thing. For me, the main thing is always long form stories.
To give the audience further context, and Jeff and I have talked about this at length offline. Yeah, we've had 3 pieces of content this year. One of them being The Finisher, that I think are responsible for about 35% of subscriber growth, at least 50% of ad revenue. Like, it's sort of that like Pareto's law or whatever, but maybe it's even more extreme. It's like 5% of the videos are responsible for, 95% of the success. And it's been a good problem to have, but it's been an interesting problem, because the content is about Barkley and it's about David Goggins, which are sort of these more like ancillary side pieces to what we've always discussed on the show and on the channel, which is like Western States, UTMB, the pro scene. And so certainly they've been top of the funnel for Singletrack, and we've had great growth elsewhere. But I've always wondered, because of that content, to what extent have we alienated any core followers? To what extent have we unintentionally misled people? Like, oh, here's this piece of content, but by the way, we're going to like never make that type of content ever again.
Right.
It was just a cool moment to leverage. We had to make it because it was just like good for the sport. So you and I have talked about that offline. To what extent does that like confuse your audience, and to what extent do you have to rectify that or slowly build back and reset expectations? So it's an interesting problem to have.
Yeah, and it's a good problem to have as well, although to a degree, I suppose it could have some negative consequences. I mean, The Finisher, it was such a great film. Like you said, it was such a good contribution to the sport. It had to be made.
Yeah.
But I guess now the question is, as it continues to get views, and I can't remember how many views it has now. It must be at 1 million.
Yeah.
Plus by now. Yeah. So as those 1 million people now get served additional Singletrack content, a long form interview with Tom Evans, the next interview, this interview, when you upload it, chances are 99.9% of those 1 million people will not watch this interview. They won't click on it. And if they do, they might click off after 10 seconds. What's the algorithm going to say? Is it going to go, this might not be a good interview after all. Maybe I'll stop serving it to anybody.
And what if because we're talking so granularly about YouTube strategy, we bring in this like YouTube strategy geek audience who has never like thought about the connection with running before. And they love the conversation. Yeah.
I aim to YouTube as David Goggins is to trail running, like it might bring in the wrong audience for you. And then they're expecting more kind of YouTube content. So I think it's nice to sort of dabble again, thinking about your audience more as a Venn diagram. You can get some outer reaches. So, but I always look at it as the potential for those audience members to become core community members. So we'll do, a lot of our fast packing videos, for example, we'll get this audience. It's some of my favorite feedback. People will say, I watched your Patagonia film when I was looking at hiking for it. You guys were fast packing. I'd never heard of fast packing or trail running or any of this, but it kind of got me thinking maybe I could do something like that. Fast forward 2 years later, here they are at their first 50K race, and they walk up and say, I'm here because of you. I'm here because I was researching hiking, and it led me down this path that opened a door towards trail running. And now they're fully engaged. They're watching all the trail running content. They're maybe coming on a trip with us. And it's all because they stumbled on something that was tangentially related. So, but having said that, if I was to make sailing videos, that might be a step too far, or kayaking videos, something where it's maybe still endurance, but maybe not quite related. So I think of it a little bit as a Venn diagram and I'm trying to bring people to the center with my content. But if you go too far, if we document our home reno of our kitchen here next week, what are the chances that somebody interested in home reno will ever convert to the rest of my content, right? So clearly that should be a separate channel. So I don't know, when we're talking about like making incredible films like The Finisher versus a podcast, those to me feel a lot more related than home renos and trail running. So, and yet, I think the devil's in the details there. It's the value of these long form, entertaining, lean back pieces versus podcasts, which are a little bit more maybe something you listen to while you're doing the dishes or whatever. I guess the question then becomes, can you keep delivering on that? Because if you can keep putting out one of those films every few months, that might be enough to keep a balance. Whereas if it's only every 2 or 3 years, maybe it does end up being, this thing that sits over in a silo.
Yeah. And to give the audience, again, just to like work with the garage door open here, so to speak, one of the recurring questions that my wife, Jules Campanelli, and I have been having nonstop every day when we put our daughter to bed and we're spending time on YouTube strategy, the open question is, okay, we have this history of doing some race coverage. We have this history of doing some interviews, some personal vlog stuff, a little bit on the gear review side. Is it possible to like spin all those plates and to have a coherent channel at the end of the day? And I think our current working answer on this is probably not, and we probably need to pare back a few of those things and promise a few less discrete categories. And I'm not sure, honestly, at this point, if it's like race coverage that goes or if it's personal vlogs. I think we really want to keep the interviews. Obviously, those are not going anywhere like this one. And then I think we want to try to do like one documentary a year, but everything else is fair game to put on the chopping block in the name of coherency, audience expectations.
What would you say is the main value, and who is the main? Describe me your main avatar, your main audience, target audience.
Yeah, I know this is going to sound harsh to some people, but we do not see ourselves as a top of the funnel for the sport in general. I don't think Singletrack is a place that you go to learn about trail for the first time. Even though I can see how The Finisher would bring people in, that is an unintentional work in that regard. We see our avatar as someone who is like already a diehard trail running fan. And they can't get enough. Like they are so diehard that they want to hear you and me geek out on running YouTube, But they also want to follow Western states.
And Western states. You often talk about following events from the professional racing scene. Like I always get the sense of like you're sort of, and I know when we first talked about on my podcast about why you started the channel, you were having these privileged conversations with professional athletes. Let's bring this into the open a little bit. Let's open the garage door, as you said. And I think that's, that there's major value in that. Like that doesn't exist in many other places, not to the quality and the degree you're doing it. And so you could lean into that further and just be the place. It's almost like you're bottom of funnel, but you're really like, you're there targeting people who are already fully in it. They want all the news. They want, you can get the best athletes right after the race and ask the best questions. You're the guy asking about sponsorships, some of this sort of inside baseball stuff. But having said that, you could expand that value proposition to other types of content, as long as I think the value stays the same. So you can make documentaries maybe about more of that inside baseball, going deeper into the inside baseball, going deeper into some of the professional side of the sport. Maybe you can be at a race. And I think that you should be the one. I mean, we talked about this in Chamonix, right? When we were right before UTMB, when both you and I were there filming content. I was surprised that you don't put yourself in the videos more, because you're the face of the Singletrack Podcast, or you're the voice of the podcast, and you do such a great job. Why not bring your voice into the documentaries even more, which you have done a couple of times, and you voiced over the Singletrack documentary. Seeing you field reporting, asking the tough questions or the interesting questions that you do on this podcast in the field while at Bigfoot, so bringing your perspective to the David Goggins story. I think that extends that value proposition, as opposed to it saying, well, we're just going to cover the race. It's like, no, you are going to cover the race and ask those really interesting questions with basically just live action versions of the podcast. I mean, I think to me, that feels like an extension of what you're already doing so well.
I think it would be cool with at least portion of this conversation to direct it at any athletes that are listening and they're curious about YouTube and they want to know how to integrate this in. And I'll make one comment before I ask a question. And I think we identified it as Aaron Lutzy saying this. He's been on the brand side of the sport for years with Red Bull. He's, worked with athletes like Dylan Bowman. They obviously have Second Nature together now. Really keen insights. And he was saying in a Second Nature episode a year or two ago, how at least when he was still in the game on the brand side, it was socially acceptable in the office to be on Instagram, ostensibly to be studying athletes on there and content trends, but that same attention could not be translated over to YouTube. And if people were watching you look at YouTube, they thought that you were wasting your time being there for entertainment. Do you still get the sense, because you're obviously like a YouTube first creator in the sport, do you get the sense that there's, for whatever reason, still some hesitance from the brands to invest on this platform?
I mean, I don't know. I've never been in those conversations, to be honest. I've pitched a lot of brands, and the ones I do, there might be some selection bias there. It's like I wouldn't be having the conversations if they weren't kind of bought into the platform already, because a lot of brands have approached me to work with me. So to me, it seems like it's mostly been very positive. I think the limiting factor is budget. I think YouTube, long form storytelling, and the longer the video is, the more expensive it gets. It's just an expensive format. Video is more expensive than audio. Long form is more expensive than short form, especially on a platform compared to a platform like TikTok or even Instagram, where almost the expectation is that things are filmed on a phone. Like things feel, a little more off the cuff. Like you can almost get less engagement if it's overproduced. So I think resources might be the limiting factor. I would say, though, I don't think everything needs to be super well produced. A lot can be filmed on a phone. I think you just need to really understand your value proposition. For me, one of my main value props is quality. It is production value. So I've leaned into that. But one way to disrupt me and compete with me would be to go the opposite way and maybe go a little bit more quantity over quality, a faster publication cadence, better storytelling, better personality, maybe. I remember hearing about this sort of the value propositions on YouTube typically are a combination of one of three things. If you think of a Venn diagram of usually personality, sort of production value, we could say, and then the third being value, either in terms of information, entertainment, some kind of like tangible value. So that could be like, it's a how-to video that teaches you how to change the oil in your car. And it's really informative. If it's totally in that one circle, it doesn't matter who's doing it, how boring they are, and it doesn't matter what the production quality is if it's shot on a phone, if it's just 100% delivers on value. But usually you win if you get at least two of the three, which is like a lot of value, again, either entertaining, funny, informative, but delivered with a really great personality. Then that's usually a win. Or a lot of value delivered with a lot of production value, where it's done with high quality. But if you've got all three, and if you look at some of the biggest channels on YouTube, usually they have all three. They have a compelling personality or ensemble cast who are just really engaging. Again, think about television. They they hire these television hosts who are just really great on camera for a reason. It's that personality circle. Production value. You throw a professional film crew at it with resources from a brand. And then the third being some kind of value like information, entertainment, whatever it is. You're learning something, you're telling a story. If you've got all three of those, you're going to have success. But you don't need all three, certainly not to start. You can start with maybe just one or two if you've got the personality and you can deliver some value.
Maybe to just to throw a couple examples out there that I've noticed that hit each of these buckets. I've seen Hans Troyer, his YouTube channel. In a lot of cases, and obviously he has The Kid, which was a wildly successful film that had high production value. But a lot of the time he is simply turning the iPhone or the Insta360 or the GoPro on himself. And I'm guessing the speed to publish is incredibly fast, and that takes off. I've seen, Tara Dower, I just watched a 25-minute, it was basically a monologue of her recap of the Mammoth 200 and, why it didn't go well and why she's pivoting towards Javelina. And I watched those with just as much interest. It had me captured from start to finish as I do, for example, your film about, racing the Mob 240. Like both checked entertainment boxes for me, despite having like huge differences in production value, etc. And so I think that's kind of liberating for any athletes that feel like they have the charisma or something interesting to say, or they just trust that people want a window into their lives. You could just start by turning the camera on yourself, minimal editing, upload to YouTube.
I totally agree. And it might be that if you're going to lead more into the, again, the information, you're doing a race recap, just do more prep, like invest more heavily on the front end of really getting notes together, really, really analyzing your race performance so you can come to deliver a lot of value, because people will find it so interesting, hearing about Rachel's strategy at the Mammoth 200 recently, like her sleep strategy, her nutrition. It's so interesting. Plus she's interesting to listen to. She's a compelling personality. But yeah, I think again, I mentioned leaning into the production value for me, recognizing my strength and leaning into that. If you are more, maybe less charismatic, lean into preparing and really delivering on value and information. And if you're more of a personality, well, a good example is an athlete named Grant Barnett. You mentioned Kraft, right? Grant is hilarious. He's such a nice guy, young guy, up and comer. He just joined the Kraft team this year, so I met him up in Tuscany. He's such a nice guy, and his content is hilarious. He has a little YouTube channel, 1,000 subscribers or so. He makes really funny stuff. I'd love to see Kraft throw a bit of a budget, or maybe have their filmmakers help him produce that. He's got the personality, right? If they can just throw a little production value at it, a little more regular upload cadence, that channel could. Yeah, it could be successful, right? And more importantly, that can follow him for years as his career develops, right?
What are some insights from your own scripting process for videos that you think would be useful to athletes, especially people that, again, aren't as technically inclined and they just want to get something off the ground? What are some pieces of scripting advice that you would give?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I'll kind of reiterate some of those points that, I have a couple different kinds of content. I have more instructional type stuff, which I heavily script, but I'm going to put that aside. Let's talk about storytelling. So I think that's the most important type of content this industry can create. Let's tell stories about our races, our adventures, our training, our successes, and our failures. And as I mentioned, and this is something I'm trying to do more, is I'm trying to be more intentional with the story. So when I race hard rock, I'm going to pre-script to a degree, and it won't be a lengthy script. But roughly, first of all, why am I doing this race? Like, really, why am I doing it? Why this race and not another race? I have a story there. I've been trying to get into this race for a decade. It's one of the most beautiful races. I've fast-packed the course. I've paced twice. I've seen the race 230%. I'm ready to go. Like, put me in. So that's going to be part of the story. But there's stakes there. It's high altitude. It's difficult. Who knows what's going to be happening in my life at the time? That might also contribute. Like the Norseman example I provided, that guy had 2 weeks to train. Maybe I'll have some kind of constraint as well. Maybe I'll be coming back from injury, but the story will be, I've been trying to get into this race for 10 years. There's no way I'm giving up this chance. Maybe the story is I get into Western and hard rock in the same season, and that's the constraint. So it's identifying those constraints, those hurdles in advance, I think, and leaning into that in the storytelling. it's not creating them out of thin air. These things exist. We just have to identify them, I think. And so I'm trying to be a little more intentional with that as well in my storytelling.
Okay. So if I'm Grant and I'm looking to take the next steps in the channel, constraints, like just writing down the list of the constraints in my life and maybe circling a few that I want to test in future videos, and I just bake that in.
Yeah, I mean, Grant's a young guy, new to the sport. I think that could be a fun angle for his channel, right? So we talked about their stories for each individual video, but what's the story of his channel, of his brand? And that can evolve over time, right? So my channel, my brand years ago started kind of as I was transitioning from road to trail. Well, at some point, I'm no longer transitioning from road to trail. I'm now a trail runner. And I went through an evolution there. And now I'm actually an aging athlete in my 40s, right? So my stories evolved again. And 5 years from now, I might be telling stories about, I'm 50 now. How can I keep doing these big things, these 200s and recover? So my arc will evolve as well. So Grant, he's a young guy. He's getting to know the sport. He's getting to know the industry, getting to know other athletes. I think it'd be fun to see him when he's showing up at these events. He's a kind of a goofy guy. He's super outgoing, kind of putting himself in situations, of running with more experienced athletes. When he was training with Tim Tollefson, who could be considered a mentor to him, I'm sure. That's the angle. It's him trying to learn from Tim, maybe. That's probably something I would do in his case. And sort of all the silly mishaps that happen, when you're brand new to a sport like this, trying to make a go of it.
Again, this is fun. Using Grant as the example, what are some, and if even just setting aside money, what are some assets that you think he could reasonably ask for from a brand like Craft to help with this? What are some things that you would advise him to ask for? Whether it's editing support, something like that.
Yeah. In the past, I always thought that athletes needed support in the way of training. And I kind of at one point thought maybe I could go into a brand like Solomon and train their team for a day on how to. And I've been told flat out by some people, no, we need our time back. What we don't need is homework. What we don't need is more training on how to do social media. We want to just not do social media. That's the point. We want to run. We want to train. We want to do our thing. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And that's where I don't think every athlete needs a YouTube channel. I think it's a missed opportunity not to be thinking about telling long form stories on YouTube, but it might not be for everyone. I acknowledge that. And creating the content definitely won't be for everyone. So that's all to say that a couple of years ago, I might have said Grant needs training and support and resources. No, I think he actually needs a filmmaking partner. I think that's it. I think if Craft can send their team to work with him and not say, great, thanks, we'll let you know when the video gets published on Craft's channel. It's no, and we'll publish it on your channel. Yeah. So taking a lot of the heavy lifting, but having him benefit directly from that to help build his brand and a channel that he can own. I don't know. You probably have a lot more insight into this kind of stuff, but I feel like it's time for athletes to start negotiating for this stuff in their contracts. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know how much leverage athletes have. I don't want to say, and I know budgets can be tight in the sense that, you can't forfeit money for this stuff, but I have heard increasingly of athletes getting marketing budget carved out as well, right? So can that not be part of this? Where it's here's your annual salary plus $30,000 and maybe a list of filmmakers that we could partner you with who could help, and maybe even some channel management where instead of training, it's literally can the team help manage the YouTube channel and the uploading and the optimization, take it off their plate?
This is to me, this is interesting. So we were I feel like we're using David all the time, but it's a great example. I wonder if David was able to create the number of episodes that he was because of the seniority or lack thereof of his videographer. From what I understand, director Cody, this might have been his first major project in the sport or anywhere. And so maybe David took on a little bit of risk, but because it was a lower price, he was able to create more content. Whereas, for example, I'll give a spotlight to this person because I think they're incredibly talented. We really want to work at some point in the next year or two with this local guy here in Utah. His name's Andrew Storr. And Andrew is the person behind the vlog series, actually his entire channel. He has created all of Clayton Young's YouTube channel. He's done his blog series for Tokyo, for the World Championships, the Paris Olympics, etc. Incredible guy. Obviously, if you had a bucket of money, let's just say 20 grand, you would get a lot fewer episodes, but very high predictable quality working with him versus maybe someone who is new, fresh out of college, or it's their first time in the space. You might get 10 episodes with them. I don't know, So I think that's an interesting consideration, as well as like, to what extent do you take on the risk of a new person versus an established person in the name of more volume versus like a few like kind of like reliable hits.
Yeah, that might be true. And people who work brand side might be listening to this saying, you're crazy. You don't understand the economics of any of this stuff. But I do know that the brands are investing in content creation. Yeah. I know how much they're spending. I know a lot of the filmmakers, and I just know how much things cost, and just the travel budgets alone to bring these filmmakers around to these different races. Again, the problem is they're trying to publish branded content on brand channels. That's all I know. I've identified the problem. I don't quite know what the solution is, but it feels like let's just divert some of that money away from the brand channel into the athlete channels, or at least let's get more strategic on the brand side. Like I said, maybe it's a team channel. So you have your Solomon channel for the entire brand, every single sport. Let's not just make a Solomon running channel. Let's make a Solomon international trail running team channel. Let's create an ensemble cast of no more than a dozen people, and let's invest in that. That's at least a step in a strategic direction. Will it work? I don't know. But the other thing's not working that we've been doing for years, or that the brands have been doing for years.
That feels like the big idea of this conversation. And again, with David Roche in his content for Western leading the way, obviously what you've been doing for years now, but like, yeah, again, just like with like the crystal ball type approach here, I am so curious to know if there's anything in the works right now for other athletes at David Roche's level in the sport where either channels are being spun off or money is being put directly in their pockets to storytell on their terms. I hope so, because it would be, as a fan, it'd be incredibly exciting. Talk about fan creation in the sport and, driving more demand to live streams and stuff. I think it would serve so many different buckets.
Yeah. And you've got people like me in the middle where I don't have traditional sponsorships. I'm not getting money from brands per se. I'm pitching brands and sponsoring content. It is just a marketing arrangement. And so, we've talked about this in the past where I feel like I'm not competing with athletes for budget. I'm competing with legacy media for the most part. I'm competing when I get invited to a race, and sometimes I do, and they'll give me an entry, some maybe even put me up in a hotel, maybe pay for my flights. I'm competing for the media entry side of things, and they've got a certain amount carved out for media. So I'm competing against Runner's World for that spot, not against the elites. The elites, there's another 10 entries for them. So I think there's still an opportunity to be creating more content by, or at least around, the elite side of the sport. In the meantime, I think we're going to see our niche, maybe you and I, carved out further, where we're going to see this part of it grow, which is professional content creators who happen to be runners. Right? And there's a lot of opportunity there. And I just think that both of those things, I hope, end up taking budget from the corporate brand marketing side of things, because not that we haven't seen some amazing content come out. Again, I keep going back to some of those incredible films that came out for about a decade by Dean Leslie and his team for Solomon. But when you look at those individually, the best films were about people. They were about individuals. Those can still be made about individuals. But I want to know where to follow. Where can I follow Ricky Gates after I've seen the Ricky Gates film? Do I have to just wait a year till they happen to publish another Ricky Gates film? Like, I want to be able to follow his journey on YouTube or whoever it might be. And again, Killian Jornet is a great example. Like, he's got a channel. It needs more resources put into it. And I think that's just a real opportunity. Lean into the personality.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that it was called Solomon TV. But now, fast forward 10, 15 years later, we are talking about how either that was forgotten or it actually is just like, it needs to be more appreciated that YouTube is competing with TV and that you have to structure your content like a TV channel. You're feeding episodic material to it. You have to think in terms of classic storytelling arcs. Again, that could be another big takeaway of this. If there are people from brand and creative at all these trail running shoe companies, apparel companies, et cetera, like that's another big takeaway here is if you're not already doing it, treating the channel like you would a television channel.
Yeah. Yeah. Solomon, they were ahead of their time. Like you said, it was called Solomon Running TV at one point. And then they merged it with the ski channel and they kind of lost all that momentum.
I think before we go, I mean, I got to ask you just generally about the Mammoth 200 experience. You know, you're a specialist at this distance. You've had great success at races like Moab before, a fantastic result here. Maybe to keep it evergreen, just talk about just like your experience there and what impressed you, stuff like that.
Yeah, so the Mammoth 200, that was the inaugural year by newly minted race director Hilary Yang, a good friend of mine, but working under the guidance of Tim Tollefson, who owns the Mammoth Trail Fest. So lots of experience. It wasn't a new team by any means. And Hilary's been co-race director at the Mammoth Trail Fest as well. But new course. And that was my first time running an inaugural course, an inaugural race. So that was part of the story I brought in, or that I tried to anyway, was the stakes for me, for my story, were what's going to happen at this first year event? Who knows? I've never done a first year event. And so we tried to capture a little bit of the behind the scenes logistical issues and things happening as well, right? So again, just a little insight into my storytelling process there. I worked with, like I said, a couple different filmmakers. I had Audrey crewing me again, which was great because the aid stations were very accessible on this one compared to a race like Moab. And it was a fast race and not a lot of sleeping was happening in the top, say, 10. And I kind of learned if I could do it again, I probably would sleep a lot less. And I did sleep a lot less than I even had planned. Just trying to keep up with, I was in 7th place on the second night. I went to bed and I was in 10th. So I had to try to catch those 3 guys in the final sort of 60 miles. So it was really interesting. I think it's going to become one of the classic 200s. It's, like I said, it's a fast race though. And so I think if you are looking for a really fast event, we saw Rachel just kill it as we knew she would, finish 2nd overall. So I think anybody who wants to run like a sub 48 hour 200 miler, this is the one.
Okay.
I think we'll maybe see the times continue to decrease over the years as well. So really great first running. But again, I was struggling a little bit with how to tell the story because I was like, how is this going to be different than previous 200s where I've kind of done the same thing? So I leaned into production value. I brought 2 filmmakers out, as I mentioned, Drew Darby and Derek Lytle. We got a ton of incredible footage. So I kind of have been joking, no matter what happens at the race, it's going to be a beautiful film. I know that. Yeah. I've got a ton of cinematic footage. And then we were trying to find the stories kind of throughout. So I do kind of look at this now when I do races as what is the story going to be in the film? But that ties into like, what's my reason for doing it in the first place? Like, and I think often when we get into a race and we're struggling and we question our why, it's because we haven't asked that question. It's like, what's my narrative arc here? How did I arrive here? What am I trying to get out of it? What's my hero's journey? And maybe if we asked ourselves that more, challenged ourselves on like, how would I make the film? We do a better job of maybe picking the right challenges for ourselves and making sure that we arrive with our why. And I actually discovered a new why on this one, which was the final. I mean, the last day I felt great. I really struggled the 2 evenings. Like I said, I ended up sleeping for 25 minutes. Tactical error, I got past. But the good news is on day 3, I felt just awesome because I had rested a little bit and I was hunting. So I was like, I got a mission today. I'm trying to catch these 3 guys that passed me. And the final sort of 9 miles I pre-run, you start the race by climbing up Mammoth Mountain and descending and continuing on 200 miles. And you finish the race by climbing up Mammoth Mountain and descending back to the village. So I pre-run that because I love being able to visualize those final miles in a race. And it kind of came together exactly how I thought it would. I picked up my last pacer, Eric, for the final, whatever it was, 15, 20 miles. And we were on a mission and I was pushing. And then we hammered the downhill. And on the live stream, they were saying my splits at the end were some of the fastest splits they'd seen. The follow cam guy was having a hard time keeping up. We were just having so much fun. Pure adrenaline in those final miles coming into town. The endorphins were flowing. And I've realized now from that my why, my reason for doing these long races is because of how I'm lucky enough that I tend to feel so good in those final miles. I usually have a very strong finish. And sometimes I've thought maybe I need to run faster, but I don't think that's it. I think there's something just that happens. There's a switch that gets flipped. And I now realize I run these races for those last 10 or 20 miles, for that feeling. If I could bottle that feeling up that I get in the last 10 miles and just have that all the time, it would be amazing. But the first 200, that's the price of entry for the final 10 or 20.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, any other, because again, you're talking to I love this scene probably as much as you do. I'm a Cocodona 250 junkie, for example, and I'm always looking to pick up bits of wisdom hard earned along the way. Anything else you learned strategically about this distance, for the next time?
I think I've realized it's less, I mean, it's less physical, more mental, that old thing, but more because I find it hard to keep the gas down. And it's like, you think back and you're like, man, there was that stretch I could have easily pushed. There was that time I kind of started walking and I know I could have run. There's 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there. There's that nap I took, maybe I didn't need to take. And so I think it's really, it's when I say it's kind of more mental, it's about staying present and staying in the moment. And having that sense of urgency that you're inevitably going to have at the end when you're trying to make up a spot, and there's races within races. I was racing for, my race was between 8th and 7th at the end. Sure. So that was my race within the race. If I had had that sense of urgency throughout the second day, right, that would have served me so well. And so I got to figure that piece out. It's how do I keep that sense of urgency? How can I find those targets early on and find the race within the race earlier on? And I don't have an answer to that, but I've got to figure that out.
I have the same exact problem. I call it, beating back complacency. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I just get into too comfortable a position where it's like, okay, I can manage this. And I keep doing it in the name of like self-preservation. But there is another gear if I wanted to, I think I could push. And at the very least, it'd be interesting to see. And it would just be another chapter of like, if I fell apart, that's an interesting piece to take back for the next time. But allowing yourself to get to that place where maybe it is a mess in the last.
Well, that's what happened to me at Badwater. So yeah. It's I succeeded. Like I said, with that one, I like to say I succeeded in failing, and that's a success in itself. That I pushed beyond. I probably went out too hard. I paid the price, and a lot of lessons were learned there. So that was a success in itself.
What's the rough timeline for publishing the film?
We hope to have Badwater out mid-December, if not early January. We might do a theatrical screening here first, and then Mammoth will likely be in February. I'm not gonna rush either of the films. We still have a little bit of travel coming up here, but these pieces will be evergreen pieces, so we won't rush them.
Cool. Well, yeah, Jeff, always enjoy chatting. Thanks for all the wisdom on YouTube, and excited to see these two things come out into the universe, and hope we can chat soon. But
thanks for having me back.
Appreciate it.